Welcome to this recipe on how to make your very own sourdough Stroopwafels by hand. You can discover this amazing recipe and others in my sourdough pastries and desserts course, which you can find a link to in the description below. But with that out of the way, let's jump straight into the video. For this recipe, we are going to be making 6 medium Stroopwafels. So let's begin by preparing a bowl and placing it on your scale. From there, add 270 grams of cake wheat flour. Tap that down and then pour in 60 grams of granulated sugar as well as 3 grams of salt. Now that all of your dry ingredients have been added, you may quickly stir them all together so that they are evenly incorporated. When that is done, switch your bowl out for a smaller one in order to measure out 125 grams of unsalted butter. Melt that on your stovetop or heat it in your microwave for 20 to 30 seconds before taking it out and pouring it into your bowl. From there, crack in 2 medium eggs. For the final ingredient in your dough, you may take out your dry sourdough starter if you prepared one the night before and add in the 50 grams to your mixture, spreading it evenly across your bowl. Alternatively, of course, you are more than welcome to simply use 5 grams of baking powder as your rising agent. You can start mixing those ingredients with your spoon and then begin using your hand once the dough begins to form. For this recipe, I would advise against using a stand mixer as the dough is quite dry, which may cause damage to both your Stroopwafels and even your equipment. But with that said, once your dough has been fully incorporated by hand, cover your bowl with a damp cloth and let it rest for 15 minutes before beginning the gluten development process. Once your dough has rested for those 15 minutes, it should now be ready for gluten development. To begin the stretch and folds, take one side of your dough to stretch it up as high as possible without tearing before folding it back down over itself. From there, repeat this technique on all sides for up to 2 full rotations. But do note, however, when stretching this dough in particular, you need to be extremely careful not to tear it or you may ruin some of the gluten development. This dough is a lot drier than most, so it isn't as flexible, which means you shouldn't apply too much pressure when stretching its sides. In any case, once you have completed 2 full rotations, fold the dough over itself and begin shaping it into a ball, using the palms of your hands to pull the sides beneath itself, which will create a beautifully smooth surface. Place your dough back into your bowl, covering it with a damp, so do not deviate too far from these instructions unless you are already familiar with this process. Once those 15 minutes are over, repeat the same stretch and fold process for a second and final time to complete the gluten development in your Stroopwafels. Just make sure you take extra care when stretching your dough as the gluten is already partially developed, which may cause more resistance and higher chances of unwanted tearing. When that is done, shape it back into a ball using your palms once again and cover it up in your bowl with a damp cloth to let it rest for 30 minutes. Now that your dough has rested and it's gluten developed, it should now be wonderfully smooth and ready to shape. So begin rolling your dough on your work surface using both hands to shape it into a 30 cm tube. Make sure that your dough is roughly even in height when rolling, and once it reaches the correct length, flatten out both of its sides. From there, take out a sharp knife and begin cutting your roll at every 2.5 centimeters to form 12 individual pieces. I accidentally cut 13, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue. From there, you may begin rolling all of your individual strips of dough into small balls, as it will make it much easier to shape into Stroopwafels. At this point, you may either choose to begin making your Stroopwafels, or you may place your dough balls back into your bowl with a damp cloth to let them rest overnight in the fridge. If you use baking powder as your rising agent, I'd highly recommend preparing them right away, but otherwise, if you use a sourdough starter, I have found that letting your dough rest overnight provides the best results for your Stroopwafels. Of course, however, if you prefer yours sooner than later, you may continue with the instructions of this lesson. For me, it is now the following morning, so let's create our waffles by hand. If you already have a Stroopwafel iron, however, you may skip the step and simply go to the next lesson. With that out of the way, you may begin by lightly flouring your work surface and flattening your ball using your fingers. You may also stretch it out to form a more circular shape before lightly flouring the top as well and taking out your rolling pin. From there, begin rolling your dough out, removing it from your rolling pin if needed. and then roll it once again in the other direction to create an even circular shape. Continue doing this all around your dough until you get a sufficiently large waffle. You may now take out a butter knife and using the blunt side only begin striping your dough to form that signature Stroopwafel pattern. You want to do this in one direction only at first, with roughly half a centimeter spacing between each line. And when you've reached the end, flip your waffle 90 degrees around to repeat with the same amount of spacing. Do try your best not to go all the way through your dough or you may end up with Stroopwafel spaghetti, which isn't ideal. Instead, you want to aim to go 3/4 of the way deep without cutting through to the other side. Continue rolling and striping all of your remaining Stroopwafel balls, and when that is done, you may begin to very gently stretch them out, making sure not to create any tears. This will allow the pattern to be more visible when cooking your Stroopwafels in the following lesson. You are now ready to cook your delicious waffles. If you have a dedicated Stroopwafel iron, the process is extremely simple. All you need to do is to preheat your iron and press your dough ball into it to let it cook until no more steam escapes or until your Stroopwafels are golden brown. With that said, however, an iron is not required, and if you don't have one, you may simply follow the remaining steps. So begin by placing a pan on low heat on your stovetop. It is preferable if it is non-stick, but you're welcome to very lightly grease it if it is not. Once that is heated for a few seconds, take one of your Stroopwafels and place it stripe face down onto your pan to cook for 2 minutes, or until it is golden brown. For your first waffle especially, I'd recommend quickly flipping it about halfway through to make sure it isn't receiving too much heat, and adjusting from there before flipping it back over. When it has sufficiently browned, begin cooking the other side for an additional 2 minutes. When that is done, take it off your pan and begin with all those which remain. Continue cooking both sides of all of your waffles for 2 minutes at a time, and then stack them on a plate to let them cool off while we prepare the stroop for our Stroopwafels in the next lesson. Making syrup is one of my favorite things to do because it produces such an amazing smell, but it is also the easiest thing to go wrong. So with that said, it is best to prepare and measure out all 4 ingredients for your syrup in advance so you can give it your full attention when cooking. With that in mind, begin measuring out 200 grams of granulated sugar, and then a separate bowl 50 grams of unsalted butter, which you should slice beforehand to allow it to evenly melt when added to your pot. From there, use another container to measure out 80 grams of heavy cream, and last but not least, your 3 grams of salt. When that has all been measured, take out a reasonably sized pot, preferably one with a heat resistant handle to be as safe as possible when working with your melted sugar caramel. So place your pot on your stove at low heat, and then add all of your sugar. Whatever you do, refrain from using your spoon to mix it, as that will cause your sugar to crystallize and you'll be forced to restart. Instead, when that begins to melt, use your handle to gently start swirling your caramel to prevent it from burning in one location. From there, carefully add all of your butter and again use your pot's handle to help incorporate it into the caramel. When all of your butter has melted, you may add the 2 final ingredients of heavy cream, as well as salt, and then gently swirl all of your ingredients together so that they are fully incorporated. Continue cooking your syrup on low heat for 2 additional minutes, keeping a close eye on your pot to make sure your caramel does not burn or boil over. If for whatever reason it does, do not put yourself at risk to save it, as there is a very high chance of you severely burning yourself with the heated caramel. Just be safe and let it cool off before attempting to clean anything up. In any case, if you pay close attention, you shouldn't have any issues, so when that is done cooking for 2 minutes, switch your stove off and let your syrup cool down for a minimum of 10 more minutes. While your syrup is still cooling down, you may begin cutting your waffles into their traditional circular shape. You may use a cookie cutter, or if you don't have one, even a mug with a large rim. You can make any size waffle that you wish, but for reference, the rim of the mug I will be using is roughly 10 centimeters in diameter. In any case, place your cutting tool at the center of the waffle and push down with a reasonable amount of pressure to cut off the ends, which you're more than welcome to snack on. And there you have one side of your shaped Stroopwafel. You may continue cutting all those which remain, and once your syrup has sufficiently come down to temperature, begin generously spreading it on the inner face of one of your waffles, before using another to sandwich the syrup at the center. Something to note is that depending on the thickness of your waffle, you may prefer to cut it in half and apply the syrup from there, but I have found it much easier to make thinner waffles and join them together. But with that said, when it is done, you should now have a perfect Stroopwafel. If you have enough willpower to resist, continue sandwiching all of those which remain until you are left with this lovely stack. I absolutely adore these Stroopwafels, which smell so amazing and taste even better. I think everyone should try melting one over a hot chocolate or coffee at least once in their life, but even on their own, they are such an amazing treat. I truly hope you have enjoyed learning to make your very own homemade Stroopwafels, as it's been so much fun sharing it with you. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and do remember, if you want to learn how to make even more amazing sourdough pastries and desserts, such as these chocolate donuts, or even these cinnamon rolls, then do check out my dedicated baking course, which you can find a link to in the description below.